There's another side of the game that is just as important, maybe more important, and that's the whole mental side of the game.
Mindset and belief is way more important than skills, especially when you get to that high level.
How does a coach instill that belief in a kid? I mean, I see it so often, and they struggle with that.
What happens for some coaches is when an expectation is not met, then disregard comes into play.
When does it get to a point where maybe it's anxiety where it's gripping this young girl or boy?
Anxiety can become sort of more pervasive, and sometimes that can then elevate where people are having panic attacks.
How many, athletes do you see that the parents really have been an issue for these kids?
I've seen where the parents are incredibly helpful, and then we've seen the other, right, where parents can sort of get in the way.
My son, who had a lot of confidence, had 4 major injuries, and I've learned that injuries have a big impact on confidence.
With every injury, athletes are experiencing a loss.
I think this is such a key issue. As the kids continue to climb, it becomes even more imperative and more important to have this type of mindset.
Hello, everyone. Brad with Pure Athlete. I am so excited to announce our newest sponsor, Guardian Sports, and here to talk about their amazing product, Guardian Caps. COO of Guardian Sports, Jake Hansen.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Yeah, we're really excited to partner with Pure Athlete here, just aligning the missions of prioritizing youth sports safety with our Guardian Cap product. The Guardian Cap is a lightweight, less than 7-ounce product that's one size fits all, that fits over any existing football helmet. The Guardian Cap is currently used by the NFL, CFL, 90+% of FBS NCAA teams, and over 350,000 athletes around the world. We're excited to partner with Pure Athlete just to help grow the game of football and help allow these athletes to play the game they love without the repercussions. If you want to learn more about Guardian Caps, go to guardiansports.com and reach out to us from there.
Hey everyone, back to Pure Athlete. I am Jeff Francoeur along with Brad.
I'm Britt.
Britt and Brad.
We've been doing this
89 episodes in.
You know what?
Our name right.
You still can't distinguish us.
I gotta lie. I had to drop off kids today. I've only had 1 cup of coffee.
Look, it's you're an MLB star.
I'm getting older, man.
People, we understand.
Is this what happens when you get older? You lose your mind a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
But you can't distinguish between faces usually when you get
That's true.
You get older. You're
That's
just struggling
true.
with that a little bit.
But I will tell you this. I love this time of year. We got the baseball playoffs going on right now. College football, NFL in full swing. So
great sports time.
Yeah,
it is.
Waiting for the leaves to turn.
I was going to say, that's getting here. It's getting there. The weather's starting to change. So I know we have a great guest this week, though, Britt, and it's something that's really, I know, close to your heart and kind of how you walk through with your kids. So I'll turn it over.
Yeah, I think we're going to jump right in because this is a super important topic, and we really do have a great guest. We talk a lot, and as parents, we spend a lot of time and a lot of money on skills for our kids, helping them with their swing or helping them with their shot or their stroke or whatever. But we know from experience and from research that there's another side of the game that is just as important, maybe more important, and that's the whole mental side of the game. And I can tell you from my personal experience, we're going to talk today about the topic of belief, and boy, I just saw the impact of belief and unbelief in spades with my boys. And I've talked about this a little bit in the past. Twin boys, they both played a lot of sports, but ended up in tennis, and both had a pretty good amount of success. But one had a lot of success, and the other not as much. And they basically had very similar skills, and it really came down to one of them from the very beginning had tremendous belief and the other had tremendous doubt and tremendous negativity. And we fought that and wrestled with that through their whole tennis career. And so, I've talked about, we saw sports psychologists, but we waited really late to do that. And that's a regret of mine. But I'm excited about this topic because I think it's so important for parents and for kids and for coaches to understand. And today we've got an amazing guest. We've got Dr. Caroline Silby. And just to tell you a little bit about her before she comes on, Grew up as a figure skater, and in fact made the U.S. figure skating team. So very accomplished. She translated that into a career in sports psychology, and has spent a couple of decades helping, young girls, young boys, adolescents, and college kids. She's got her doctorate in sports psychology. She's helped a number of Olympic gold medalists, kids in all sports. So today we're excited to welcome Dr. Caroline Silby to the show. Welcome.
Hey guys. Hey Britt. Hey Brad. Hey Jeff. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
How are you?
I'm good. It's a little earlier here for me than you because I'm out in Colorado right now, but all's good.
Well, we appreciate it. We appreciate waking up early for us.
Yeah. No, I'm a big fan of your show, and with you guys, I have 2 kids. You've got 14 between you, so I'll take any advice I can get too.
Well, I know this, that, Britt said something before we kind of get going with you, but he said, for playing 12 years in Major League Baseball, mindset and belief is way more important than skills, especially when you get to that high level, because I always say it, watch the playoff games right now. You watch hitters or pitchers that are up there, you can see which ones are confident and which ones have the belief. And you can tell when a guy's struggling and when he knows I'm not. So I think this is such a key issue, and something that as the kids continue to climb and go to that next level, then the next level, it becomes even more imperative and more important to have this type of mindset.
Yeah, no doubt. Caroline, why don't you just take a minute and tell us a little bit about your story and what got you in here and why you're so passionate about this topic?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. I think, as you said in the intro, I figure skated as a kid. I was on the national team, and I got introduced to sports psychology for the same reason that a lot of athletes come seeking help, which is that my performance outcomes were incredibly inconsistent. And I just couldn't seem to match consistently my outcomes with capability. And as a result of that, the enjoyment that I was having in the sport was really compromised. And so I started to work with a sports psych, and certainly I think I learned how to sort of manage the nervousness that I felt in performance situations. But what I also really got out of it, and I hadn't expected, was to really also learn how to manage sort of my emotional ups and downs on a daily basis and in the training, because the training becomes very intense. And then as expectations, rise, you want to be able to meet those expectations. And so uncertainty sort of comes into the picture. So I guess you could sort of say my career culminated in skating when I competed in the Olympic trials. And since not one of the people in your audience has ever heard of me before, you can guess how that turned out. I did not make the Olympic team. And that failure, honestly, to make the Olympic team really set the stage for what would come next, which has been, a pretty long trajectory for me in the field of sports psych. So it's been a great career for me. I've learned so much from every athlete that I work with and every family, and just feel really grateful that sport has brought that into my life.
I love that, because you can sympathize. My wife told me all the time, I announce now that I stunk in my first job so I could be better in my second job and know what's going.
That's kind of tough. She made the Olympic trials, so she didn't stink.
No, but you know what I mean? I mean, I played in the big leagues, but I'm just saying at times, you struggle, and now it's led you to this, and you're helping tons of people now. So much more important.
Well, I got a question. Can I ask you about those Olympic trials? Because I can't think of anything more stressful than going through an Olympic trials. And so I have 2 questions for you along those lines. Do you feel that you would have performed better if you knew then what you know now? And the second question was, how long did it take you? And this is really along what Jeff said. I was giving him a hard time, but when you had that quote unquote failure, because I mean, you probably thought of it as a failure that you didn't make the team. How long was it between that moment and the moment where you said, you know what, I think I want to pursue this to help others overcome kind of what I came? So 2-part question.
Yeah, no, really, I need to be thoughtful about that. Those are great questions. Yeah, I wish I knew everything that I know now. There's two things that impact performance. It's the personality of the athlete, but it's also the environment in which athletes train, and making sure that those are aligned and are a really good fit becomes incredibly important. I knew that I needed to change things to be able to compete more consistently. I needed to change the way I trained. I needed to change the way I thought about things. What I didn't really know at that time was how to sort of manage the physiology and the adrenaline. I didn't really understand that piece. And I think that when people talk about trusting your training, I got it in my head. I didn't really fully know how to implement that. I really needed more time to figure that out and more competitive experiences. I did know pretty early on when I met with the sports psychologist that I thought he had the coolest job in the world. So I was always sort of thinking, well, that would be a really neat pathway to take. I have to be honest that in my era, there weren't a lot of professional opportunities in skating. You literally like could become a Smurf in the ice capades. And that was like not what I wanted to do. So I was looking for ways to sort of combine some of the experiences that I had in sport, but in a broader way. And so it's been a great fit for me. Yeah.
Caroline, I want to jump in with a question. You just mentioned personality. For me, I always wondered, is it just the wiring of a kid that gives them, some kids just seem to have belief at the very beginning, and some kids, and this was our experience, and some kids just seem to be wired different to be really hard on themselves. Is that just a pre-wiring, or is that something that they learn along the way? What's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give you, I'm going to give you the psychobabble answer, which everyone really doesn't like, which is it depends, right? But it really does. I mean, I do think nature is really strong in these situations, and that when you sort of look at people's strengths, to become a really, really great athlete, it requires a determination and an amount of perfectionism even, right? Like sort of that ability to obsessively do something. And so that strength can become people's greatest weakness as well. And so, yeah, you really have to get in there early and sort of be able to help people learn this sort of concept that they don't need to attack themselves in order to get the results that they want, right? So you can be really driven, but when athletes start to turn on themselves because they haven't met an expectation, you can sort of think about it. They become two people. They're the attacked, but they're also the attacker. They're both people. And that just soars, that cortisol, the stress hormone just soars. I mean, think about it, right? You go right into fight or flight because you're the attacker and you're being attacked. And so if you're going to do that, one, it doesn't help performance, but two, you're going to have to learn how to dial your physiology down in order to navigate your way through that effectively. But you're also then going to have to recover because, right, like that's going to take its toll when you're consistently responding in that way. So yeah, so really teaching response patterns and kids understanding, especially athletes, they have a really hard time understanding sort of the word acceptance. And when I say acceptance, I don't mean that you give up or you give in or you don't acknowledge that you didn't meet an expectation or perform to your quality, but you also don't story tell inaccurately around that. Acceptance is really just stating the fact, this was not to the level I'm capable of. And when you're able to do that in a factual way, that allows these kids that have such a strong desire to elevate, to tap into their competitiveness and their hunger for more. But if you're beating yourself up and turning on yourself, it becomes really difficult, right, to tap in to that hunger for more. They think it's helping them tap into the hunger, right? Like, well, if I keep telling myself it's not good enough, then I won't become average. And the last thing they want to do is become average. So sorry, it does depend, but I do think that nature starts it. We're all born with sort of a certain amount of anxiety.
Yeah. So, speaking of anxiety, we sit there and talk about that. So a lot of parents, I think, will watch their kids and they question, like, is it nerves that my kid has? Is it anxiety? Because, I've always said, like, nerves is a good thing. It means you care, means you're invested, means it means something. But when does it get to a point where maybe it's anxiety, where it's gripping this young girl or boy to not let them develop? Like, what are some of the signs that you would tell parents to look for?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, like, performance anxiety is usually very situationally specific, right? They're anxious about an event coming up. They're anxious about making, the varsity team. It's something they're anxious about, the exam they have at school, or getting, like, sort of juggling everything that they have on their plate in that moment in time. Anxiety can become sort of more pervasive. And when we're looking at a problem, it's frequency and intensity. So when frequency of anxiety increases, intensity increases, and there's some sort of like an unknown origin, kids if there's nothing specific, they're just saying, I'm dialed up and I'm anxious. That's when we sort of want to take a step in and say, okay, what's going on? And sometimes that can then elevate where people are having panic attacks, pretty frequently.
Caroline, do you see when you meet with your athletes, are they able to compartmentalize that anxiety they're feeling about their specific sport or a specific event? And then when they're away from that practice or away from that competition, they're able to kind of let it go? Or are you saying that they're carrying it with them really throughout the entire day or through the entire week because of that pinpointed anxiety about that sport?
Yeah, that's a really good differentiation to make. Both. So with high level athletes, we really need to schedule recovery in for that reason, so that they're not carrying it with them, right? When the pressure is such that, that and Jeff, this, when your career is based on performance outcomes, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty hard so maybe you can even speak to that, to sort of not carry that forward. And so the mental and physical recovery becomes really key. And also, we know with sort of happiness levels, it's not intensity of happiness, it's actually frequency of happiness. So we really try to encourage athletes, yes, to be able to sort of debrief. Like, I'll give you an example. After training, we might have them debrief to help them gain perspective, but also to put training away so that they can move on to other areas of their life and other dimensions of their personality. So really quickly, when they're doing their physical recovery, they answer 3 questions. What went well today? What did I learn? And what do I want to let go of and leave behind? Right? Quick, easy, but sort of allows them to gain some perspective on the day, and then they can move on and move forward.
I think it's interesting because my whole thing that I would do is after a game, I would, shower, have dinner, or late dinner, 10:30, but eat. And then I would call my dad every night on the way home for like 5-10 minutes. And we talk kind of about my bats, maybe talk about the game, something else. And then that way, when I pulled in and Katie and my kids were there, like, I was done for the most part. I was able to kind of move on. And that's why I say you need an outlet. You got to have something, to be able to free your mind. Cause I agree. If you're thinking of it all the time, you can't go there.
No. And just to add to that, and that's such great advice. And to add to that we also know that recognition of other dimensions of people's personality beyond their athletic identity lowers the risk for development of anxiety and depression. So super important.
So you're saying, wait a minute, you're saying that if they're not hyper-focused on performance, which they have to be probably to be excellent at their performance. But if they're not, they're probably healthier overall.
Yeah. I mean, you need to be focused at the right times, right?
Yeah.
The right times, right things. And if you're thinking about performance while, you're eating dinner at night, right? Like it's not a help. What are you going to do? You're going to feel out of control. There's not anything you can do, right? And us imagining ourselves handling a really difficult situation in front of us, when we have no control over it in that moment, makes us feel anxious.
So Caroline, getting to, kids, in their sport, on the big stage. I mean, they're in a game, they're in a tournament, they're in whatever. So many kids don't play to their capabilities. You see them on the practice field and they look like this, and you see them at game time and they look like this.
Like my golf game.
Like
see me on the range, see me on the court.
Well, yeah. I mean, kids tighten up. And what's behind that from a mental standpoint? Is it fear of failure? What do you predominantly see?
Yeah. Well, so if I come at it from sort of from a positive place as opposed to defining the problem for you, let me start there. That the kids that we see that elevate seem to be able to make a connection between their own actions and their positive results. So when an athlete comes to me, the first thing I ask them is, tell me about a time when you performed great. And they will in great detail talk about a time that they performed great. The next question I ask them is, so I want you to identify one action that you took that contributed to that positive result. And can you guess what they usually say?
I'm blanking.
Practice or training or something like that, maybe?
I wish they would say anything, but they say, I don't know.
Oh,
yeah.
Right? Like they literally don't know.
Usually a solid answer. I go back quite a bit.
That's what we just
did.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I made a stat.
And that's okay, right? Like that's completely okay, but we need to figure that out, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the fact, like knowing how you contribute to your own positive results. If you don't know, how do we ask you to do that consistently? We don't, right? Like they have to show up just hoping, right, that the training translates and that it goes really well. I don't want somebody hoping. I want to be able to say, no, here's the approach that you're taking. Yes, here's where your focus is. When you struggle or a situation becomes more difficult, like a lot of kids worry about what the coaches think, they don't want to make mistakes. I don't want to get pulled out of the game. I don't want to lose playing time, right? Like, so when that happens,
yelling at you.
Yes, exactly. Let's put strategies in place to help you connect with the approach that you use when you're successful. So to me, that's really the foundation from which confidence is built. And I feel like when that foundation is solid and they can really know what their own actions, thoughts, beliefs, how those contribute to their performance results. Now, when things go wrong, the foundation is solid. And from there, we can layer coping skills on top of that. But when they don't know and then things go wrong, it just crumbles, right? Like confidence, there's nothing solid for these experiences to be built upon. Wow. So that's sort of where I start.
Where were you 10 years ago?
Well,
I mean, that's so big. I mean, because I just see, my kid going into a match hoping that it's going to be different. And as soon as something happens that feels like it happened before, all those hopes go away. And it's like we're right back in the same place.
So what are some tools, Caroline, that you can do to build that foundation of belief so that if things, go wrong in a match or things go wrong on the field, that they could go back and trust that foundation that was built? What can you do for a child, especially a younger child who's growing up, to build that foundation?
Yeah. So there's so many there's so many things that we do, and a lot of them are really dependent upon what resonates for for athletes and sort of for what they're going to be able to use in a certain situation, and also what their sort of the culture of their sport, what also fits within the culture of their sport. But I can definitely give you some examples. Like typically we want athletes to first regulate physiologically, and then but I like to start with the physiology just because I think a lot of athletes, I'm not opposed to self-talk. I love self-talk, right? Like changing the self-talk is so important, but sometimes it just keeps athletes grounded in outcome thinking as opposed to sort of being able to move them into more action oriented sort of ways of being on the court or the field or whatever sport they're playing. And so so sometimes for us to think straight, we have to start with the physiology. And I say that because when we're faced with uncertainty, the first thing our mind does is search the environment for things we need protecting from. Right. So that's where all the don't make mistakes, don't lose playing time, don't have mom and dad yell at you, just the basic ideas, the mind just starts racing. And so it can be really hard for kids to all of a sudden just say, no, but like, I can do this.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's just easier, not easier, but just more effective for them to sort of get reconnected into their bodies. And sort of grounded in the present moment. So we do that, with like even simple things like, breathing is a great strategy. A lot of kids do not like it, but it does work because when you think about the breath, so when you think about our bodies, like all of your bodies can't time travel right now. Would you agree with that? Your bodies are right here, right now.
Yeah.
But the mind can, right? So you can if you think about yourself as like a stick figure, like the head literally can pop off your body and start thinking about the last play or what's going to happen later on, after the game, right? But your body is always right here, right now on the field, on the court, playing in the pool, whatever it is, right? So the mind is completely disconnected now from the body. And what we want to do is sort of get the mind back connected. And so when you go into your body, simple things, you can, if you're playing lacrosse, you may have them just tense and release around their stick. Non-dominant activity is shown to improve performance. So if you're right-handed, you squeeze the stick with your left hand, get it into your left hand and squeeze it. Pushing your toes into the ground one at a time. You guys can even do that now in your shoes. If you try to push the toes, one at a time. You have to sort of really put your mind on it and focus on it. That little toe and the second to last toe get pretty
I'm
hard.
trying right now. It ain't working.
Yeah, to push in. Even tapping on sort of karate chopping here. If you notice, it pulls attention right into the here and now. Pulling on the ears activates the vagal nerve, which actually activates the relaxation response. We also do things like, having kids put their hands behind their head, and then you move your eyes up to the right. You keep your head straight, but you move your eyes up to the right corner. You hold that, bring the eyes back, move them to the left. Again, vagal nerve exercise that increases the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. Temperature change, tennis players, we use ice packs. When you are getting amped up, even just getting some temperature change will, again, activate parasympathetic nervous system. So trying to regulate the physiology is something that I think maybe a lot of your audience members may not have known about. It also can be super helpful with nervousness before events. And then you can go to the self-talk, the focus points, sort of where do I want to move attention? And on the attention side, the rule of thumb is neutral to positive. If we can get kids to neutral and sort of, I don't know if you use that, Jeff, at all, a lot of neutral thinking, we seem to sort of help them be able to navigate through difficult moments more efficiently.
Well, I wish I thought of that. Funny story, actually, my last year back with the Braves, we had when I first came up, we didn't have a sports psychologist. And when I came back, we had a team psychologist. and he had talked to everybody on the team, and he actually came up to me and was like, Jeff, you haven't come talk to me yet. And I was like, Doc, I'm way gone. Like you can't help me anymore. I'm
terminal.
I'm at the end of my career, man. Go help somebody that's got something. But no, I wish I would have had, cause you hear this stuff and, all right, I got a question for you. What age really, like a 7-year-old can't grasp this stuff, right? Like at what age do you start to see kids or when it can really help you?
Yeah. So it depends again, but 7, yes, is too young. They're just starting to be able to think about their experiences. But where we for sure know that there's going to be some performance concerns is that as kids as expectations for performance increase and kids start going through puberty and confidence starts to decrease. Okay. Now we have this gap, right? Performance expectations are going up, confidence is coming down, and now you have this gap. That's where you starts to see performance inconsistency. So, with boys, we see it a little bit later because adolescents can actually improve confidence in males, those who tend to be in the high school level, that sort of high school age where we're starting to see, and also kids tend to sort of start to wonder, well, can I really make the club team that I want to make? Am I going to be able to make high school varsity? And am I going to be able to go on to the pro? So you start to sort of see it with boys. You see it a little bit earlier with girls, sort of in those preteen years. So 12, 13,
That's because middle school girls are the meanest girls in the history of America. Is that why?
Yeah, there's a lot of social aggression and complication that goes on in middle school.
I'm starting to deal with it now, so thank you very much.
Yeah. And the boys are just sort of like overwhelmed. Like, what is happening?
Just dumb boys.
They're just dumb. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How much do you see when you talk to athletes, how much parents have affected their outcome? What we talk a lot about is obviously wanting to have the athlete and the parents have a great relationship with since all said and done. So how many, athletes do you see that the parents really have been an issue for these kids?
Yeah, I see both. I've seen where the parents are incredibly helpful to the experience, both on the quality of the experience and then also in terms of performance outcomes. And then we've seen the other, right, where parents can sort of get in the way of both of those things. And so there's something that is called regard. And we all know what regard is, but I feel like it gives us a really good framework when we're discussing parenting, like sports parenting. And what regard is really that we show somebody belief, respect, acceptance, engagement, and challenge. It's 5 things. It's those 5 things. And what the research shows is that the regard that young people receive from important people in their life, parents and coaches, that type of regard that they're given, they mirror in themselves. So one of the things is that it's pretty easy, I think, for us to believe, respect, accept, engage, and challenge our kids and other people if we're coaching them when they're successful and meet our expectations. What the research shows is that when that regard is given no matter what, not if and when you meet an expectation, but no matter what, those kids seem to develop more of a perception of competitive situations being exciting and less threatening. They also mirror that so that they start to feel those things about themselves, and they treat themselves with respect. So I'll give you an example, because this is a process. It does not happen overnight.
Yeah.
And so I do one of my consulting one of the things that my company consults with is U.S. figure skating. And so I did get to the Olympics with the U.S. figure skating team. So I guess I finally got there.
That's a win.
It's perfect.
But the 2018 team was almost exactly composed of the same people as the 2022 team. And one of the 2022 team had a ton of success in terms of outcomes. They all, regardless of, it didn't matter about medals. They did win more medals, but they all really performed to capability, which was not true in 2018. And one of the reasons that we feel like, or one of the contributing factors to that, we feel may have been that sense of regard that they had received was now internalized. That in 2018, it wasn't quite there yet. It wasn't quite developed, but by 2022, indeed, it was. And they felt that for themselves. So what you saw was that instead of them turning on themselves, they were in that place of, no, I'm going to respect myself and my competencies today. Like, it is not okay. And I even said that to an athlete, like right before she went out, that it is not okay what you're doing. You're disrespecting yourself, and you have earned the right to respect yourself. And so internalizing that and really feeling that at that point took time. It takes maturity, right?
Yeah.
And it's a process. So it just keep giving that regard. We know the outcomes from the research are really strong.
Caroline, I want to go back to Jeff's question and your answer about age and when somebody should maybe think about seeing a sports psychologist. And you know, we talked about 7, and obviously 7 seems a little young, but I've said on this show before, one of my regrets is that my son, both my sons ended up seeing sports psychologists, but the one who really benefited the most we didn't do it till he's 17. And one of my biggest regrets is that we didn't do it way earlier. And I literally probably spent 3 to 4 years saying, I think I need to take him to somebody, but I didn't know how to find somebody. I didn't know how to make that happen. But he told me when he finally went to see somebody, and one of the biggest benefits was just being able to talk to somebody who wasn't his dad, or wasn't his mom, and just being able to unload a bunch of stuff. And as a parent, I'd been trying like crazy to say the right things, to give him the right input, but it was so beneficial. And I really wished I had taken him at 12 or 13, because what he told me at 17 was, you know, I see these same patterns in other areas of my life now. And we talk a lot about sports being, you know, translating into life lessons. And that happens both ways. And so he's had to wrestle with not being negative about his outcomes and his performance in other areas of life that I really wish we had gotten help in sports at an earlier age. So can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, with sports psych, you know, one of the first thoughts I have in listening to you is that having somebody outside the immediate family, right, see your child's unique qualities and like really get them. There's just so much value to that. Yeah, it is incredibly impactful. And I see it with my own child who I have working with, not me, a different sport psychologist. And she needs that. You know, and I always joke that I said, you know, like, I feel like with my own child, I get like a performance minute. I literally get 1 minute to do to say what I would take 45 minutes to an hour with somebody else's athlete. And it's just really impactful to have somebody outside the immediate family see your child's unique qualities and to really just understand them and to hear them, you know, non-judgmentally. And, so yes to that. I think the earlier, I mean, what I would say is that when your kids are driven and they're excelling at sports, we sort of know that there are inherent pressures in sport. There just are. And so they're not, it's not this sort of like, okay, it's this, right? And so I think, to your point, I think if the more talented your athlete is, I would say, and the more they're competing at higher and higher levels, get in there earlier, just to even when there aren't any issues. Like, I love seeing kids to do what we talked about earlier, just what's going right. Like, how often do we do that? Even like, I know in my family, like, we don't do that enough, where you just sit around the dinner table, right? Like, what's going right?
Yeah.
Like, why are we happy? Like, what's going well?
Yeah, I think about back to my career, and I've always said I wish I enjoyed the good moments, the great moments, a lot more than I did the bad moments. And I know it's a cliche, but it's so true. It's like we don't celebrate that stuff enough. We celebrate, but so I heard Britt say that, and I of course will be watching as my kids continue to grow. But how do parents find somebody that's good, that's reputable, that you're not just taking them to, Brad over here to talk to your kids?
Yeah, I give it a good shot. I give it a good shot. I mean, I try my best.
Yeah. You guys actually have a lot of good people in your area. So it is, the beautiful thing is when I started in sports psychology, there weren't that many people. Now the field has really grown exponentially, which is fantastic. But I think you want somebody who has a degree, a master's, a PhD is a good start. And CMPC, which is sort of the certification, through the Association of Applied Sports Psychology. It is important to find somebody who's certified. And then, and I think athletic departments usually know, if you call the athletic department of any of the big universities, they usually have some recommendations. They usually have a sports psych now. They're usually incredibly busy and booked. But if you call an athletic department, you usually can get a good referral. Also going through your school counselors is a great way to find people, because they know people in the community. Sometimes the pediatricians will also know people in the community that at least can give you a start on some names locally. But there's great people all over the country. And I do provide a lot of referrals for people, but I don't want to do it for everyone in your audience.
Caroline, I got a question for coaches. And I love the term regard that you used, and it just kind of has a connotation of such a healthy self worth, self feeling about each other. But coaches are, sports, and Jeff talked about this, sports is so focused on mistakes. It's so focused on the negative. And you hear the term, more games are lost than won. And you watch figure skaters and you watch gymnasts, and it's all about the mistakes they make. And so coaches are constantly preaching, perfection or not making mistakes. But how does a coach instill that regard or still that belief in a kid? I mean, I see it so often, and they struggle with that. They struggle with, or kids struggle with trying to so much impress their coaches, or they don't believe that their coaches have belief in them, and it affects their performance. So how do coaches kind of deal with that tension, I guess, between creating that belief and regard in the kid, but also trying to eliminate mistakes?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it is how information is delivered, and providing feedback just in a really factual way, it sounds silly, but it actually can be really impactful, right? Like, you pair sort of the delivery of that doesn't meet the expectation, but at the same time, you're challenging them to do better. Like, I've seen you do this. You're factual with it. You're not storytelling around it. And what happens for some coaches is when an expectation is not met, then disregard comes into play, right? So now I'm not going to engage with you at all. And that is really difficult for athletes, right? Like, cause now now I can't make any mistakes because now the coach won't even talk to me.
Yeah.
Right. So we do give athletes strategies, right? Like, if they have a coach that provides disregard, then athletes really need to fill the space with focusing on what they are going to do. So there's a whole lot of stuff you're not going to do that you could probably tell me that you're not. What are you going to do? Right. And let's do that. So you're going to be the first to the ball. You're going to be really physical in this moment. Like, I don't care what it is, but be intentional and sort of have your athletes need to have non-negotiables. Like, no matter what, these are the things that I'm going to do, you know, I'm going to chase down every ball. And sometimes they're technical, sometimes they're tactical, sometimes those non-negotiables are mental, right? But it's sort of being able to help athletes put filters on that. And from a coach perspective, I think it's really training coaches that it's providing acceptance to an athlete in the form of letting them know very clearly sort of what the standard is without showing disregard is not going to lower performance. A lot of coaches feel like, well, then if I show some sort of acceptance, then they're not going to challenge themselves. And that it just doesn't play out in the research. It shows that when you give them that standard in that way without storytelling around it, it's not, you're never going to, play again. You're not going to get to the next level. It's when you eliminate all of that, performance elevates. And so I think it's, there's a lot of pivots that are happening, I think, in coach education now, and coaches are learning different ways, to go about it and to coach this generation of kids too, which is different. And
yeah, that's important stuff. Caroline, as we wrap up, I have one final question. You guys may as well, but I've talked a lot about my own personal experience here, but my son, who had a lot of confidence, had 4 major injuries. And I learned through that by injury number 4, he came back, and I didn't see this at the beginning, but he came back and his confidence was gone. And I've learned that injuries have a big impact on confidence over time. And we didn't know that to give attention to it. But can you kind of speak to what you see in all that?
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah. And multiple injuries like that really impact the quality of the sport experience for sure. Yeah, I mean, I there's so much there with sport injury. The first thing that comes to mind is that with every injury, athletes are experiencing a loss. And there's like grief literally that goes along with each injury. And then there's these emotional roller coasters, right? And then depending upon the environment in which that injury is happening and the type of support that they get, the quality of the experience can really change, and it can change pretty quickly. So, yeah, I don't have the nugget, like, oh, this is what you do in injury, and then it's all good, because it is such a process. So I guess I've seen in athletes having somebody to talk to through that, having somebody help them understand the emotions that they're feeling, and that those emotions come and go. And that very often when you can help people, especially in the injury process, sort of step back from the emotions and understand what those emotions are telling them, as opposed to, I'm not supposed to feel this, and it can be anything from athletes can feel relief sometimes initially when they're injured, right? Until they don't. And so, but they feel guilty about feeling relieved and having a little time off. And so being able to just step back, help them understand and get curious about sort of the emotions that they're experiencing. I hope that can really help them navigate through it, at least on the emotional side and sort of the quality of the experience.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, good stuff.
Well, we know you're busy and you got a lot of work and you're getting your day going. So I know we thank you so much for coming on with us today.
This was great stuff.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff's helpful, man, because,
Thanks.
we have so many athletes that come on and tell great stories and stuff, but being able to, like you said, I think help them along the way mentally as they get going will be huge.
Well,
so
yeah, I'd love to have a part 2 because I've got about 4 more questions for you that I'd love to get answered. So yeah, this was fantastic.
I'm up for it. I'm a big supporter of your guys' work. So thank you for all you do. It's so needed. It takes a village, right? So
It does.
we just all need to keep encouraging to keep up the quality of the youth sport experience. So thank you guys.